Basically, this paper is about the relationship.
Okay, start again.
Today, our group will be presenting the paper Rethinking His Heritage, the Case of Heritage Conservation in Mumbai, written by Prasad Shetty. Basically, this paper is about the relationship between how the history was written over the period for Mumbai, and it's because of that what led to the heritage discourse and how the conservation of Mumbai history was done through Mumbai's heritage movement. This paper is divided into three parts: manufactured heritage, rethinking history, questioning conservation. Firstly, it debates the standard way of writing heritage, introduced heritage as an elite aesthetic imposition, and underestimates many other contributors in city's history. Further, the author proclaims an alternative way to historiography based on the changing modes of production, identifying shifts in the economy of the city and its effects on the built environment. In conclusion, the author questions the strategy of preservation and conservation of heritage site and demands an alternate strategy to be adopted for the same.
Manufactured heritage. Historiography is the study of the writing of history and of written histories. Um,
I got
just
removed
like
from the meeting.
It's gone up.
okay.
It has gone.
Yeah, I got removed from the meeting. Can someone please make everyone the attendees or something?
Yeah, please.
Okay, you're back.
Okay, I'll start again. Yeah. Uh, Historiography is the study of the writing of history and of written histories. In this part, first the author has highlighted the features of conventional history writing, which include an elitist description and selective glorification of only certain groups and heritage structures, leaning more towards British colonization, thus marginalizing other stakeholders in the city's history. The conventional historians also state this description to be the only defining framework for something to be of heritage value by making bizarre assumptions about heritage in history. There is also a comparison of writings by different authors that seem to be contradicting, Kanga versus Dengle, where one is more celebratory and the other more skeptical. The question remains is that who and which is Mumbai's past, the British colonization or the evolution process of India and Mumbai itself? Further on, analysis of this historiography is done to understand and define the term manufactured heritage. According to State Gazetteer, Mumbai's history is divided into five phases: ancient, medieval, Mohammedan, colonial, and modern. This, the author highlights as rigid classifications into certain periods in chronology and a new tool of analysis called styles for defining and classifying structures in Mumbai like Gothic, Neoclassical, Mumbai vernacular, etc., and reinforcing them with powerful adjectives such as flamboyant, magnificent, palatial. The terms and classifications they use help to manufacture this heritage value for these structures. A shift from this classification and type of writing is seen in the writings of Mehrotra and Trivedi, wherein relations of the events, buildings, and the context of the city are established along with cultural aspects. The positive side of this is that it talks more about the people, the immigrants, settlers, communities, which helps in the identification of stakeholders, the real heritage of the city, but it still engages in selective glorification due to inadequate data that leads to generalization of details and tends to ignore the other contributors from the collective memory of the city. Further on, some historians target new developments as harmful or threatening to the existing fabrics and high rises, AC units, and hawkers to be intrusive, whereas all these changes are bound to happen for the city's growth. All these are considered as vague fears of losing past, an elite interest directed towards removal of hawkers from streets, imagining clean and green landscapes. Arguments put forth by these conventional historians are heritage protection is necessary to locate one's identity in the city and to protect traditional skills and crafts, working patterns of the native population, etc. New developments cause the loss of rich medieval town histories and previously developed urban heritage, and development pressure causes fractures in the historic fabric of Indian cities. What is not considered is that development is the function of the growing economy and that heritage conservation of traditional arts and skills is actually a way of the elite to make museums out of them rather than help them continue forward and evolve with the context. Also, that the built environment is actually a result of the evolution of the existing context, and that one culture's ideas and philosophies are based on other cultures too. There is certain romanticism, an absolutist view, and orthodoxy portrayed through these writings that are spread to masses and often gain huge political support through pressurization to the extent that it leads to the formation of the Heritage Committee and regulations for protection.
As mentioned earlier, only certain colonial buildings, elite class people who shaped the city in some ways were glorified. But in this section, works of Meera Kosambi shows a shift from these tendencies of glorification and adopts a socio-ecological framework to write history of Bombay. Her analysis for socio-ecological framework was done through various surveys based on change in land use, demographic, ethnic, and earning patterns, which defined architecture and urbanism in different manner. Kosambi's research of history was not based on finding a specific style of architecture and glorifying it, but it was about sorry, finding a specific style of architecture and glorifying it, but it was about understanding the build form. To understand this build form, the focus was on the analysis of the type of form and its relation to the socioeconomic conditions instead of the style. The abstract talks about the multifamily dwellings spread throughout the city, where the lower part would be used as shops and the upper part as a place for living. Kosambi's history was based on a method which was different from what the historians used. Her method included more people who had contributed towards the building of the city rather than just glorifying certain selected buildings and people. For example, she focused on the mill owners, their condition of living, and their contribution to the development of the city instead of the elite industrial families. There were methodological shifts in writing alternative histories where Rahul Srivastav argued that being a part of the history of a place gives more sense of belonging to that place, thus involving the youth of labor community into writing the history theories in his Neighborhood Project 2002. The third methodology for writing history was given by Damodar Kosambi in 1975 that critiqued the Indian history being lost in the glorification and unavailability of the related data in literature, archaeology and anthropology. He defined history as the presentation in chronological order of successive developments in the means and relations of production to show how people lived his works and put together history of India as a function of changing economy. The shift in the methodology was adopted by Kamla Raita's School of Architecture. The framework they followed was looking at history as changing modes of production, identifying shifts in the economy of the city and its effect on the built environment. Mumbai's economic growth was based on 5 phases, which were the agrarian, mercantile, industrial, service, and financial. Changes in city landscape, state policy, built form, urban development practices, and perceptions of the city were recorded on the basis of the economy. The methodological shift is identified when the studies include labor housing, fishing villages, and slums as heritage of the city, along with classic revivals and Art Deco buildings. The Collective Research Initiatives Trust did an experiment where it involved the communities in the writing of history in a form of a diary, which was used as a bargaining tool with the government for urban services.
The third segment of the paper throws light on the idea of questioning policies of conservation for a city. It argues that the distinctive elements of a city, such as street shops, slums, labor housing, and local businesses, is what makes a city unique, and that is the exact heritage which should be conserved and not wiped off in the name of urbanization. The author discusses the same with the help of 3 case studies in the context of the city of Mumbai. The first project was undertaken by research and consultancy wing of KRVIA on the old residential district of Mumbai. The district was in jeopardy of being seized by builders who were in favor of extensively developing the area on the account of it being close to business centers and due to high land prices. The people living in the area, however, were barely aware and interested in the issue. The attempt was to build something with a sense of heritage for the sector. So the study group undertook various researches and pulled out archival material to prove that this place was designed as per the Garden City rules in Europe and is only one of its kind in Asia. And the people were then made aware of what they were giving up in order to achieve only a state of hope for living a better life. The group was successful in convincing both parties to let things be as they are and also pressurize the government to declare the area as a heritage precinct. Certain strategies were formulated to resolve varied interests and resources to benefit the area. In the name of heritage, the group also helped to organize communities to become active participants in the otherwise practice of making unhealthy development strategies and conserving urbanized spaces of a city. The second project is based on the Dharavi slums, again undertaken by the students of KRVIA in 2003. The group mapped the work patterns of the people living in the slums and looked at history through the lens of service labor in the city. They found that the slums were a hub of some of the oldest small-scale industries and harbored labor-intensive businesses like food, garment, leather, and ceramics. It was older than many colonial buildings in the city and was definitely under the new cleanliness drive. It was under the threat of being ribbed. Large apartment blocks were being constructed under the name of urbanization and development. The problem was that this industry has several middlemen appropriating the large profits created in these industries. As against the earlier efforts of the state to provide housing for slum dwellers, this study proposed a formation of a cooperative so as to enhance the economy generating capabilities of the slum dwellers and expected this in turn to address the other living conditions. This project formulated history so as to articulate heritage as a culture of work that requires protection and promotion. The third project is based on Vasai Virar sub-region in the northern periphery of Mumbai city. It was undertaken by the Collective Research Initiatives Trust. The region is distinct due to presence of agrarian economy with a number of tribal, agricultural and fishing communities. Under the increasing pressures of urbanization, builders aspired to seize this land, seeing this whole region as a dump yard of Mumbai region. Unlike the other cases, here the pressure was external as well as internal when it came to urbanizing the space. The group realized that the people living in the area collectively were, however, not so hell-bent on bringing about a change. The myth of living an urban lifestyle had to be changed in the mindset of the youth and replaced with providing high-yielding economic opportunities along with good services. The group filed an objection with the government on the development plan, aiming to get environmental protection norms in it. It further listed down other heritage buildings in the area so as to protect them and not let them fall prey to the hands of aspirational builders. The group is working towards developing 3 village strategy plans for agricultural, fishing, as well as tribal settlements. The aim was to strengthen the local capacities of the people in order to economically develop the area. This project too uses heritage as a tactic to mobilize the communities and argue with the governing bodies, politicians, and builders.
Therefore, in the paper, the author has this debate on how conventionally the history has been written about Mumbai and like how different people from different region and having different cultures can have different perspectives, or we can say chronological order for the events that happened in the history in their view. Also, the author concludes that with the descent of time, like now in the modern age, people want to see these secondary heritage spots, but still there's a lack of strategy for conserving these sites. Like for example, in the paper, how our author says that the heritage sought for the consumption of tourists is of the nature that our heritage activists were campaigning to save, whereas a slum or a labor housing has yet to become an object of aesthetic consumption. The author debates it's high time that we have proper strategies and implications to preserve these alternative histories which conceptualize multiple kinds of heritage. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. So, So let's discuss some of these questions first before we go on to the next essay. And this essay raises some interesting questions about heritage itself. And obviously, the essay is very critical of what it calls the elite version of history, where the people who write history are mostly preoccupied with the lifestyles, achievements, monuments, and so on that represent the city's rich and powerful, in a sense. And obviously, if you look at what is considered heritage in Mumbai, it's very clear that the Victorian Gothic heritage, colonial buildings, the Art Deco precinct, all of those are generally considered to be heritage and conservation worthy, as they like to call it. Whereas the rest of the city is almost like, basically it can make way for development and so on. So that is something that the author is critiquing here and saying that, look, I mean, we need to think about who writes history, how they frame the question of heritage, and then who eventually who are the people who eventually decide what is preserved and what makes way for change, right? And so the question is, and then the author makes a few arguments about, this is an alternative way of thinking about it, and then there's a discussion about Dharavi and a discussion about Vasai Virar and Dadar Parsi colony and so on. Okay, so let's discuss this question a little bit. First question is, what is heritage? What does the word imply? What does it mean? And what gets recognized as heritage, and what ought not to be recognized as heritage? And the second question is that what is the way in which one intervenes in what is considered heritage? So let's take the first question first. According to you guys, what is heritage?
I think it could be anything that makes a place unique in some sense, that something which is special to some, and maybe like a tradition which is being like followed for quite some time, and definitely like it has to have a meaning also, but that could be heritage of a place. Like in the paper also, like it's not just confined to buildings which are looked at history of a place, but also work patterns and like small scale industries and things like that also maybe.
Okay, so what is being recognized as heritage? Tradition, or work patterns, or buildings?
I think all of this falls under heritage. Could, I mean.
Okay, so all right, so let's reverse the question. What is not heritage in the city?
Maybe whatever doesn't belong to the city, or is like suppose any high-rise building which is not specifically, like you can see the same thing in different cities, or so that won't be counted as a city's heritage, because that's not really Mumbai or Delhi or any city as particular.
Okay.
So maybe that.
You should be okay. So let's be careful when we say that, all right? Because one of the arguments that the author is making is that these precincts that we should protect and so on, they have livelihoods and they have people who work there and people who live there and so on, and it has nothing to do with the style, right? So if we take all of these miscellaneous builder real estate constructed buildings in the city and say these are not heritage, then we are saying that the people who live in them or work in them and so on, their neighborhoods are not important. You know, so there's always that question. I mean, heritage is a question of valuation. So when you actually flip the question, it becomes even more interesting, because then you're saying that, okay, this is not heritage, because by default everything is considered not heritage, and then some people fight about identifying certain things as heritage and worthy of protection, whereas the rest of the things are not worthy of protection. But if we have to specifically ask what is not worthy of protection, how will you answer that question? And the response that you gave is, you know, it can be questioned by saying that, but people live there and they work there, it is a part of the economy. Then how does, you know, to take Prasad Shetty's argument forward, how does that, what is the argument for disregarding that? You know, and if economy, livelihood, and residence is important, then it cannot be considered non-heritage. So how do you then talk about what is not heritage?
Like by saying that, what I meant was that it's easily replaceable by any other type of a building or a complex.
So you can say the same thing about, let's say, you can say the same thing about working class housing. No? It is easily replaceable with any other building. You can say the same thing with, I don't know, Victoria Terminus. It's easily replaceable with another building. It is a difficult question. It's not an easy one. So take your time to think and respond.
Yeah, like when we were also discussing the paper amongst ourselves, so we also were discussing a bit of this, and like we had a question as a group that like, okay, like one part of the paper, like the first, like it's divided into 3 parts, right? So the first part, it kind of says that you know, urbanization and development is bound to happen in a city, and like basically. Like in the question conservation part also, it says that, you know, the pressure was internal as well as external when it came to developing a space. So like people living in the slums or people living in a particular area also, if they like, they also wanted some kind of urbanization, and the builders also wanted the space to get urbanized, but just because it's under some garden city rules and everything, like it didn't get urbanized. So we also wanted to ask that how much of it is very like, what should be given up in the name of urbanization, when, like, you know, when no one wants to continue like having that. So like it is the city's heritage, we understand, but like if the people living only there don't want to continue living in such conditions, then they want the urbanization to happen, then there should be nothing above that, right?
Okay, so good question. The problem is not that people want urbanization, because even heritage is urbanization. Even, I mean, the choice of protecting something is as much urbanization as the choice of pulling it down. And the same thing with the word development as well. When you say this building should not be pulled down, it is not anti-development. It is a choice made within the framework of development that, look, this is important and let's preserve it. So this artificial kind of distinction created between people who are for development are for bulldozing things and rebuilding them, versus people who are not for development are versus not doing anything. That's a false binary. The point really is that what do you choose as heritage and what do you choose as not heritage? Now, some people tend to locate heritage in the built form itself, which is the approach that the author is criticizing. You know, to say that this style of building or this construction quality of building or this aesthetic or this view or this neighborhood, all of these are important aesthetically or in terms of architectural style, and therefore it has to be protected. There are some others who locate the question of heritage in certain groups and community. They say that, okay, you know, the Kolis are a very important community in India, therefore their environments have to be considered heritage, or the East Indians are a very important community, and therefore, so the heritage, the location of heritage is not the building, but the you know, the ethnicity of a group and so on. In that, the problem is that, okay, then if, you know, people who are not Kolis or East Indians or I don't know, working class Maharashtrians and so on, don't they have any claim or stake in the city? So that can be a question that can arise. Okay. Then there are people who talk about intangible heritage. Heritage is not something that is in objects, but it is something that is in practices of culture, or the more in language and and so on. So these are intangible aspects which need to be preserved. So you may change the built form, but you don't transform you try to continue the intangible aspects. Now, in that, the alternative view would say, but well, certain kinds of practices are inherently exploitative or inherently oppressive. Do you want those to continue as well? Right. So these are the kind of debates that you tend to see in the world of heritage. In terms of object-centric heritage, in terms of practice-centric heritage, in terms of community-centric heritage, and that is what makes the field a highly contested field. There are lots of points of view and different people wanting to argue it differently, and that's essentially the outlines of the debate. And I mean, this is not a place where we have to discuss what is the right way, because there is none. As you can see, it really depends on one's political orientations, one's professional or cultural biases and so on. So I'll just leave it open as a debate like this, and it's something for all of us to think about. All right. So now let's move, unless somebody has any other questions or comments, let's move to the next essay.
I guess no one has any questions, so we'll start.
Go ahead. Start the next one.
Yeah. Okay. So paper was written by Shweta Wagh. It's on the heritage in the post-industrial city in Mumbai. It talks about the conservational practices, how they have a narrow spectrum of interests and domains which they intend to align with, which is usually in the favor of the elite or upper class in society, and they often ignore the socio-cultural aspects related to the historic landscape upon which they lay the city's claim. While it also completely overlooks the interests of the marginalized communities. It also talks about heritage, how heritage was always discussed or looked at in terms of architectural values. But now these values are being questioned, and these values are now shifting from this whole monumental meaning to more socio-cultural aspects and the living histories of that place, or memory landscapes. And yeah.
During the post-industrial phase, with closing of mills and manufacturing industries, the economic restructuring of the city shifted from so-called economic restructuring. It shifted from landscape of production to landscape of consumption. So the decline in welfare state and its progressive communities led to the term modern market modernity, which pervaded into the architecture and the heritage conservation. So in the late 20th century, due to the commercialization of the conservation movement, and also due to the corruption in the miasma of commercialized nostalgia, it led to the term called heritage industry, which is so heritage industry is referred to as heritage as a commodity, opposed to manufacturing goods replacing the real industry. So heritage can be called as a subset of culture industry, where culture arising spontaneously from masses, rather than fusing old so where the culture industry is where fusing old and familiar goods to a new quality, rather than culture arising spontaneously from the masses. Now the new market culture the new market culture challenged the new autonomy of traditional traditional this thing the manufacturers in the city. So next page, yeah. As a reaction to modernist contextualization and a rejection of city's industrial past, the postmodern conceptualization of city as a palimpsest consisting of multitude of layers and urban sculptures, where each piece of city having its own local particularities and distinctiveness is now being posed as a resistance to force of globalization. So, in some way, meaning of heritage emerges as a paradoxical tendency of preservation and renewal. So, cities colonial past have been expanded into to include other inner landscape of cities like the industrial cores, the Kautans, the Koliwadas, the some historic slum, namely Dharavi and others. So the renewal and restructuring of dilapidated city areas of cities facilitated the erasure of diverse social fabric, which brings in homogenization. So the historic inner city neighborhoods such as Bhendi Bazaar are being completely transformed, where investor-driven transformation is facilitated. So now conservation practices remains disengaged from everyday struggles of common people, often displacing and marginalizing the communities which contributed to the historic development of the city. Yeah, next.
Yeah. So, in the recent times, heritage has started to acknowledge this significant aspects of the living culture and the intangible cultural practices. On the other hand, culture is now evolving into what is becoming this new business of cities, which is based solely on the tourist industry. Here, heritage becomes the representation of these historic places, which are the most favored tourist attractions, and then these places are then used for their conversion into cultural destinations. Like for example, the Kalagoda precinct in the South Mumbai has this high concentration of art galleries and museums and like cultural spaces, and then like the Kalagoda festival plays out these informal galleries on the pavements and the exhibitions, which is set amidst this Victorian building. So basically, the Victorian buildings become the backdrop for this Kalagoda festival. So this idea of combining art and cultural events with the heritage buildings brings the old heritage to life, and it also provides an opportunity for the elite and the middle classes to appropriate the public spaces. What next? Yeah. So, leading conservationists of the world, they started talking about the role of corporate world, which would sponsor and fund the heritage conservation projects, and they thought that marketization of heritage is the best way to preserve heritage. So, like for example, the Horniman Circle precinct is promoted as the banking district, and all these large heritage buildings, they housed banks and promoted what they felt was the right corporate image. So like the new corporate owners of these buildings, they become patrons of the patrons of conservation, and to retain the imageability of the buildings, they started taking efforts like facade makeovers to lose the visible signs of decay, and also relocation of hawkers to what they felt was a more appropriate location. Next. Now. So, Professor Kamala Ganeshi offers a different perspective. So, she's a sociology professor who is based in Mumbai, and she writes a lot of articles and books based on the social and cultural issues. So, she argued for a more inclusive perspective to heritage conservation, which described the multi-level diversity, like ranging from fancy bookstores to pavement bookstores in the same area, and basically creating an ethos which caters to all tastes and purses, and thus highlighting the public nature of the place.
Next, we look at how conservationists and planners use nostalgia and memories to actually rationalize these plans and projects that they come up with for the urban landscapes. Like we start with like Ananya Roy's essay where she says memory evokes territorial loss and struggle, whereas nostalgia evokes the idea of territorial claims, which when they are formalized as heritage, they become legitimized claims. So an example of this that I could think of was the whole Ram Mandir issue, but I'm not exactly sure. Then how the nostalgia is used is through collective memory of people and the land, evoking nostalgia to lay claims upon the historic elements of the city. Uh, Conservationists and planners using these claims to support cities' claims. So the Mumbai's claims on the mill lands in Mumbai, for example, in an attempt to prevent the fragmentation and unplanned commercial redevelopment on these lands. But this actually did not happen, which I'll explain ahead. Uh, and through monumentalization of the abandoned mill buildings and chimneys, representing them as symbolic artifacts to validate their preservation. The Korea plan was then developed, which actually looked at conservation and adaptive reuse. The buildings and the structures there to be recycled into boutiques, cafes, designer stores, and middle class housing, and also artist studios. But these schemes actually overlook the livelihood needs of workers and inhabitants, like assuming that these plans that they were coming up with could compensate for the social and economic consequences. So this is how like nostalgia of the city, of the history can be used to rationalize and validate these visions and projects that signify the historic importance of the mill buildings within the city fabric. Uh, the Korea plan was at least a slight glimmer of hope for the mill workers and inhabitants, but then everything was turned upside down when the laissez-faire won over, and it resulted in exactly what the conservationists and planners uh, were afraid of. Uh, then and like thus like the mill lands are in the state that we see today, haphazardly placed upper class residential and commercial high rises, which completely trivialize the very fabric and identity of the mills. Like an example of this you can see in Phoenix Mills or in Kamla Mills, where you see all these corporate offices coming up, where the identity of the mill lands on and the chimneys and all, it's completely being washed away.
Yeah. So, continuing with the same idea and looking at aesthetics and identity of different places. So, we often see that vernacular townscapes or towns are looked at for their aesthetic attributes. But in cities or urban scapes, the working class neighborhoods don't actually contribute to the aesthetic attributes and are rather lack visual qualities. Uh, they are untidy and cluttered environments because of the activities that happen, and also the occupation and the community needs of the people or the community living over there. Looking at such one of the neighborhoods, the Gautans. So the Gautans are structured in such that there's community living, wherein there are different mixed-use spaces, and the settlement eventually goes in a very organic and open-ended manner, rather than being a very planned settlement. And also there's the hierarchy of different community spaces wherein different activities of occupation or community living are taken place. So if you look at the whole settlement, there's a codependence and codependence between the landscape that gets formed and the social life of people. Next. But the development plans that have come up, they don't actually look into the living into such settlements as the living landscape, and are constantly leading to how the neighborhoods could be beautified, or how they could be cleaned, and which leads in a way to the replacement of such so-called dirty and uncomfortable places to safe and aesthetic ones. So, looking at an example, so Ranwar, it's a small settlement in Bandra, wherein it's slowly transforming and acquiring this whole bohemian feel with local shops and eateries with and graffiti walls that are coming up, which doesn't actually cater to the could help the community living over there, and it's basically how there's a class shift because of the upper class coming in and starting such businesses over there. And which doesn't look into the community as such. So if you look at the concept line of Mumbai, there's this imagination of different thematic cities wherein even the fishing villages and everything had to be converted to fishermen's museums, seafood centers and everything. So the problem with these approach is that it looks into the architectural identities. Of the identities, but doesn't actually look at how the life of people happens around these areas and settlements. The paper basically talks about how this needs a different approach, wherein there's a change needed, and for the continuing of the heritage and revival of it, but rather it also looks into how the social life and community rights could be preserved, wherein there's development along with the community rather than just the architectural identity. Next.
Looking back at all these aspects, it comes forth that the mainstream conservation discourse does not really address the issues of the socio-cultural continuity, and it rarely is accommodative of the needs and needs and the interests of the communities, local marginalized communities. Like how should one engage with the living histories? As a response to the hegemony, the earlier discourses in the earlier discourses on revitalizing heritage, the needs of the living histories was always sidelined. But conservation can no longer be seen separate from these other issues of urban development and planning. So there is a need to reconceptualize and articulate a framework for identification of these heritage values, which are based on the understanding of the sociological morphologies of the city. Such an example where conservation movement was used to accomplish social goals was the conservation movement in Europe in the 1960s and 70s, where conservation was basically used as a strategy to improve the decaying historic buildings and create affordable housing in them. To conclude, the social ecology of the cities, it involves a lot of interdependent systems and relationships, and often conservationists only seek to preserve the tangible artifacts. But it is important to understand all these various aspects to articulate a framework that will actually tackle it inclusively. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, could somebody point out what is there's a slight difference in the arguments that are being made in the first paper or the first presentation and the second paper. So, could somebody point out what that was? I think we already discussed the argument that was being made in the first paper, but somebody highlight that essentially.
Yeah, in the first paper, I think it's mainly talking about what is the history of the city, like what is what can you consider as a heritage within that urban scape, and in this particular one, like we're talking about how, like once that heritage has been identified, like what is the city actually doing with it, like and like how what we should be doing versus what we are actually doing with the heritage, kind of.
Okay. Anybody else wants to have a go? Okay. All right. So I think, yeah. So I think what the comment was that the first paper is looking at the history and how historiography, is kind of created, and how history is written, and therefore what gets identified or kind of understood or classified as heritage, right? So it's about what heritage is, and the second paper looks mainly at once that has been done, then how it's implemented, right? Or how it actually manifests in our city. So what I'd like to point out is that is not so. In a sense that both the papers are in a sense looking at Bombay, looking at heritage in Mumbai, but the arguments take two different, slightly different directions, or there's a slightly different emphasis in the two arguments. And in a sense, both are looking also at aspects of how heritage is kind of conceptualized, created, and what gets identified heritage. So the question of what and how it manifests are addressed in both the papers. So while the first paper is looking at the emphasis is on history and the writing of history, and talking about how a certain understanding or a conceptualization of something creates results in a different kind of a outcome or a manifestation, right? So because of there is a selective glorification of certain areas of the city with based on their physical attributes, based on their tangible attributes such as the architectural value or the style, or the architectural style, or the history of that building, and in terms of when it was built and which period it belonged to, etc. The kind of technology used in constructing that building, etc. So these are aspects that generally help in identifying what heritage is. And historically, the focus or emphasis of the heritage discourse has been on built stylistic historical values or architectural values, as opposed to other more intangible values. So while that is the case, I think the first paper also makes an argument in terms of who then decides, or who then is writing that history, or what is the purpose with which that history is written. Like in the sense that history is not there's no kind of objective history in that sense, according to the author, and that the person writing history clearly has a certain agenda, or there's a certain agenda with which the history is written. And for instance, Sharda Dwivedi and Rahul Mehrotra, when they wrote about Bombay and Mumbai's history, they were doing it with, it was basically a kind of a Indian elite view of, which kind of glorified and had a nostalgic kind of view of the colonial past of the city, which was lost, and the colonial glory, which was being lost because of all this urbanization and new development. And somehow that led to a certain writing of a history which romanticized certain aspects or glorified certain aspects of the city's heritage, which were considered as important or significant and therefore worthy of preservation. And the emphasis was at that point clearly on South Bombay and the colonial heritage in South Bombay, which was basically the colonial city which was built by the British. And what the author argues is that this actually led to the neglect of many other kinds of histories which could have been written, or even histories written from the perspective of the working class, or the history written from the perspective of the common people in the city, who may not really have been concerned with, the glorious architectural heritage or the past, but were more concerned with more immediate aspects such as their livelihoods, or the street vendors who were in fact inhabiting the arcades of, the DN Road in South Bombay, and vending, selling their goods there. Or for instance, the booksellers who used to occupy that, stretch between Churchgate and I think in Fountain, right? Because earlier that entire street used to be known as the Book Street, and it was quite like, but then they were pushed to one corner. So what this certain kind of imagination, or the certain kind of understanding of history also led to a certain discourse and a certain practice of conservation, which was more concerned with aesthetic values, etc. And what the author argues, also Prasad argues, is that you also need to look at other histories of the city, and you can look at Dharavi as heritage, or a kind of a more ordinary settlement which doesn't have this glorious colonial history is also heritage from the perspective of those inhabitants. And he argues for the writing of different histories, and for the idea of what is conceptualized as heritage to become more inclusive and include the diverse and multiple histories of the city. In the second article, which I had authored, like I think several years ago, I in fact tried to take this argument forward and also, in a sense, examine it critically, saying that it's not just enough to it's not just enough to identify multiple histories, because that is something that one sees, in the conservation discourse also. One sees that the earlier approach, which was more myopic and building centric and centered around the tangible attributes or the physical values, has expanded to look at intangible aspects and socio-cultural kind of relations. Also, the conservation discourse is interested in the local histories and in communities and in all their socio-cultural practices. So over time, the discourse itself has evolved, and today our understanding of heritage is not restricted to just the built or the physical aspects of heritage, but it kind of is inclusive of many other things. So one does see this expansion in the notion of what is heritage. But what I do is also to take a more political, economic kind of critique of the heritage discourse and practice itself. And there I also look at this concept called, because while at one level, the kind of real estate development and urbanization that we see in our cities today is completely erasing many of these fabrics, and all these kinds of histories that once existed are slowly being kind of replaced by a new kind of city which has completely lost its link to its past. But at the same time, one also sees practices of urban renewal doing two different things. Like at one level, there is this kind of erasure, but at another level, there is also this kind of glorification of certain places of the city which are singled out as being significant and therefore, thought about as heritage. And that leads to their preservation. So urban renewal that we see in our cities today has both these tendencies. One is of erasure and the other is of preservation, and both of them go hand in hand, and we see both these tendencies in post-industrial Mumbai. But what I argue is that it is more of one needs to kind of understand the kind of economic and political kind of roots of what is going on. And I think there I come up with this, I think there I refer to this idea of the cultural industry, right? So one knows that in Mumbai actually developed as a trading post, but then later it became an industrial city. And a large part of the city's economy was based on the mills and, the workers who worked in the mills. And what we see since the 1990s is one process in Mumbai, which is known as deindustrialization, and which led to the shifting of the mills. I think some of the earlier essays must have covered those aspects, if you'll remember. And the working class, in fact, was somehow moved out of the city, and one increasingly sees a kind of change in land use in these areas, central areas of Bombay, which were earlier occupied by the mills and working class neighborhoods. And in a sense, what happens is that the economy of the city, whereas industry is no longer the main economy of the city, it is being replaced by other kinds of economies, like, for instance, the real estate and the financial sector and the service sector is taking prominence. And with this, what tends to happen is what has been described as the cultural industry. So what replaces manufacturing or earlier activities which were based on actual manufacturing of goods to the cultural industry, which in fact becomes about the manufacture of heritage. And in fact, there are various authors like Gleneding, etc., who have written and analyzed this, not just in Mumbai, but in various other cities across the globe, where if you see many cities in Europe are, they are identified as World Heritage Cities or World Heritage Sites. But when you actually go to those cities, it's very difficult to find the local people who earlier inhabited those, city centers or those historic precincts or areas which are, designated as heritage sites. And what we see on the other hand are a kind of all the brands. It's almost like when you enter a shopping mall and you see all the brands like Benetton and Levi and etc. etc. And so you see the same brands and all those kinds of shopping chains, etc., which kind of occupy the central parts of these cities. And in fact, these have displaced the local people who probably earlier resided there. And we see this process taking place in Bombay also, where when something is manufactured as heritage, it also implies that, yes, that place is not erased to build high-rise buildings, but what we see is this slow process of gentrification, a removal of activities and livelihoods and people who earlier resided there, who can no longer afford to stay in these areas because the rents go up. And we see the coming in of these elite cafes and boutiques and shops and a lot of other kinds of uses which earlier did not exist there. And this is not a natural phenomena because in a sense, I think one needs to understand that heritage is also, it's clearly, it's a construct, right? It is manufactured. It's not that there is something like heritage that already exists. It's through a certain discourse that one decides what or defines what heritage is. And for instance, the branding of certain areas of the city, like, Kala Ghoda was branded as the arts district by heritage professionals, which is why you have this kind of proliferation of art galleries there and these events, which is also resulting in a slow change in land use. And what one sees also is that when you have something branded as a banking district, then that's when all the, where it's branded as something by saying that these glorious colonial buildings actually are, will house the banks because they're kind of, there is a prestige about them, or there is this kind of, an image that is kind of projected, which is significant. And that leads to the removal of many of these other activities, like, for instance, the hawkers of DN Road were completely cleared out as a part of this conservation process. So, in a sense, that the argument is more about a political economic analysis of how this plays out, and also not just in terms of how heritage is defined, but how even certain cultures and communities then get identified as heritage. Or, like, for instance, you talk about the Koli heritage, right? And then that also results in the kind of selective kind of preservation of certain parts of that particular culture and a kind of a museumification of the community, whereas the larger interests of the community may not really be catered to and may be completely erased in the city's development. You want to add anything, Hussain?
No, I think that covers almost everything that I wanted to say as well. Yeah, I mean, do you guys have anything to add or any comments or questions? Maybe we can have a discussion.
I kind of had a question. Like,
yeah,
when we were discussing about what could be done with the mill lands, like the Korea plan was come up with. But if it sounded that great, how did it not get implemented? Like, how did the laissez-faire win over?
I mean, it's a very interesting question, because how great was it, first of all? Okay, let's also look at the Korea plan a little critically, because what has happened is the Korea plan seemed to be the only alternative to what was about to happen. So a lot of people were, in a way, endorsing it. But the Korea plan was also quite exclusionary in some ways. For instance, I mean, I think we discussed that when we were doing the class on land, as to how, for instance, it did not have any. Um, I mean, it presumed first of all that the land belonged to the landowners, and or if it didn't belong to the landowners, that that they should get a large share of it. So 1/3 was reserved for commercial exploitation by the mill owners. Now, the land was not the mill owner's land to begin with, you know. So that 1/3 was actually quite a big giveaway, you know, and there was no reason to do that, you know. But it proposed that. Secondly, it identified 2/3 for the city. And whenever you hear the word city in a generic sense, as if it represents everyone, you should be a little, your ears should kind of stand up a little, because it means that somebody is speaking on behalf of a collectivity, although not necessarily representing all of it. So the city meant the BMC would get 1/3 and it would build open spaces. And open spaces, you can imagine what kind of open spaces they would be, you know, the kind such as Oval Maidan and Cross Maidan and so on. And the other 1/3 would go to MHADA, which would build public housing, which is obviously good. Public housing is a good thing, but it would be for anybody who applies for public housing, you know, MIG, LIG, EWS, and depending on what kind of public housing gets built. But if the mill owners were getting 1/3, then why the mill workers did not get anything? And the only thing that the mill workers were offered was voluntary retirement schemes, which obviously they opposed, right? Even despite all of these limitations, the Korea Plan was, you know, in a way torpedoed by the real estate industry, because they didn't want 1/3, they wanted the whole thing. And we discussed how, for instance, the DCRs were manipulated and interpreted in a certain way, which eventually led to almost the entire land going into their hands and becoming commercial real estate. So even the Korea Plan, with all its limitations, was was not enough. In fact, the High Court had actually ruled in favor of the Korea proposal, but the Supreme Court turned it down. So yeah, I mean, this is the story, and and like Shweta's article points out, that the Korea Plan, apart from its huge giveaway to the real estate industry, to the mill owners, also had this kind of a quaint view of the mill district, as you know, we have these cute chimneys, and we have these nice barrack-like structures, industrial buildings. So we can kind of tweak it and rework it, and it can be reused and recycled for other uses and so on. But the question of what happens to industry and what happens to all of the people who depend on the industry for work. And it's not just work, it's a certain kind of work. It is the kind of work which is protected. It is the kind of work which offers better wages for an organized workforce, as compared to, in the Korea Plan, he in fact spoke about how many of the mill workers could actually find employment in the residential areas of after the proposal, in the form of domestic help and so on. So the way in which Korea kind of reimagined a job transition was from a formal organized sector to an unprotected, kind of work for the mill workers and their families. So that was, I mean, those were the problematic things in the proposal. But despite all of that, obviously nobody listened even to the Korea Plan, and we see what has happened now. Completely in fact, if you look at the 2011 census of the city, there is the negative population growth in the island city, and that has a lot to do with the change in land use, even though I don't think anybody has really pointed it out or even studied that very closely. The fact that there is a negative population growth, whereas in the rest of the city there is a positive population growth, suggests that many people who used to live there earlier have now moved out, and most of the people obviously who have moved out are working people. So that's essentially the thing. And then you retain some parts of that older fabric as heritage and so on, and which is the kind of culture industry that Shweta is talking about. Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Have any of you visited the Kala Ghoda festival that happens every year? Nobody?
Yeah, we have.
No, I mean, yeah, it's an interesting phenomena. In fact, you guys should probably in your thesis or something study it a little more closely. You know, these kind of art districts or thematic districts that get created, and certain kind of new kind of economies are created around the concept of culture and heritage. It's an interesting phenomenon to study. Obviously, extremely exclusionary, but that is what is going on. I mean, if you look at the new Eastern Waterfront proposal by Bimal Patel, it talks about similar things. You know, there is, all of these bandars that are there in on the Eastern Waterfront, Lakdi Bandar, Koila Bandar, which had to do with certain kinds of trade. Those are being reimagined as the Maharashtra street and the yoga street and all that, whatever. I don't want to use um, any unfortunate terms here, but so that kind of cultural reinterpretation of what is essentially working class neighborhoods, in order to make them suited for tourists and for the consumer class rather than for working people, is what is also something that happens in the name of heritage, which is what in fact Shweta's essay is talking about. Yeah. Okay then. So I think yeah. So one thing that I wanted to tell you was that the paper is going to be set by us, and we'll use these essays as the as the material for setting the paper and the classes and the discussions that we've had. So that will basically be what the questions will be about. There'll be lots of choices for you, and at least the way, if since we have to set the papers, the way we'll be setting the papers is that we'll not be these papers will not be about um, providing the right answers, but it will be more about getting your views on certain subjects. And that is how it will be. So I don't think we need to have another class on this mic is on. Turn off the mic. Yeah, so if you can, yeah, so we will not be having another class, but we'll probably inform you about the things that you should probably look out for in the exam, so you can prepare accordingly, because there are lots of essays, and we'll tell you that, okay, these will be the general kinds of questions that will come, and just prepare for them. So that is how we'll go. So yeah, I guess we are done with the third year humanities. I hope you guys had a good time, and we'll see you next year then for urban theory. Okay, any last comments or we'll close? Okay then, so see you guys, and good luck for your exams, and good luck for the rest of the year, and take care. I hope COVID is not causing too many problems, but just take
Thanks,
care.
Hussain.
Yeah. Okay. Take care then. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.